Welcome to IMC Live, the interactive webinar series hosted by the Industrial Marketing Collective. We're here to help you make connections, learn, and get results for your business. I'm Erin Burish, the strategy director here at the industrial marketing agency, Gorilla 76, and one of your IMC Live hosts. So today we are talking design. Sometimes design creative has to get a little bit more creative. If you don't have an ideal set of design assets, how do you build compelling design creative? So today we're joined by our very own marketing designer, TJ Sheridan, to talk about how to use the resources that you actually have at your disposal to make unique ads and overcome the design barriers that you might be facing. So TJ, welcome to the show. Do you want to say hi and introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. My name is TJ Sheridan. I am one of the designers here at Gorilla. I am actually the newest member at Gorilla. I've been here for about 6 months, a little bit over 6 months. And previous to this, my background is in sort of creative agency, branding, and visual design.
Awesome. Really glad to have you. First thing to kind of kick us off, in the little intro I mentioned about design challenges. What are some of the challenges to good design that a lot of industrial marketers might be facing?
Yeah, so I think historically our industry, it's really focused on functionality and efficiency and not so much aesthetic. And, that can be a good thing. But I think in the same way that the way that we market, the companies in our space has changed, design needs to change also. And because there's so much of, I think, similar design out there in the marketing space, it gives a lot of room for us to be able to stand out and for businesses to add some more creativity.
Awesome. I know one thing we run into a lot with industrial companies is not always having the greatest images. And one solution for that is using stock photos. So what are kind of your thoughts there? How do you approach using stock photos for industrial design purposes?
Yeah, stock photos are important. I think the two biggest things I look for when I'm trying to find stock photos are how relevant they are and how natural they look. So a construction company can find a random stock photo with someone in a hard hat and use that. But what problem is that solving? How relevant is that to the point that we're trying to get across? So the way that I look at it is when I'm looking at stock photos, if I was having a photo shoot for this product or for this ad phase or this launch, what shots would I want out of that? And how can I simulate that with stock photos? How relevant they are. And then the other thing is how natural they look. Like a lot of these stock photos are obviously staged, but they give off a very uncanny valley, unnatural look. And those should be avoided at all costs, really.
Yeah, and I think we know that the types of stock photos we're talking about here, if it is, the example you gave was construction, if it doesn't look like somebody that or if you take one look at it and you're like, this is obviously a model that doesn't work in construction, that's a good kind of flag when we say too stock photo-y in that
Yeah,
example.
I think a lot of stock photos too, you run into this thing where someone is in an outfit for whatever they're supposed to be, but then they're just placed over a random background that's sort of blurred out and photoshopped. And it's, so they're not even in the situation that you would want them to be in. So yeah, that's another thing to look out for.
Yeah. And that's a good point that Karen just put in the chat as well, is that industrial applications are often, dirty. That's the nature of the environment. But management wants, those nice, clean photos. And it's hard to convince them that real and authentic is better than kind of the fake, perfect, clean version. You hear that a lot with especially companies that sell equipment. So when the equipment's in the environment and it's been working for years and years and years, it's reliable, it's working well, but it doesn't always look the prettiest because it's been on a shop floor for 15 years. And so what you really want is the nice sparkling machine that you have on your trade show floor, but it's kind of a hard balance to strike in terms of, that environment.
Yeah, I'm always on the side of real is better. I would much rather see an ad of equipment that's been put through the ringer and is still working than, sort of the fancy, really nice, we're not sure if it works or not, sort of brand new, untouched look.
Mhm. And Mary Keogh just put in another really good point is that PPE varies from industry to industry. And that's really important is if you are using a stock photo that doesn't have like the proper safety requirements, that you can kind of run into some problems with that.
Yeah, totally. That's a hard one.
Um, yeah. So, TJ, another thing, if you don't have good images at your disposal, we talked about stock images and kind of what to look for there. The other option is to take your own images. How do you capture good image assets as a marketer who's like not a professional photographer?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that iPhones are so advanced now that pretty much anybody can go out in the field and take usable photos. The big thing there is a light composition, like just making sure things are in frame and in focus and what you're trying to show is being shown. And then the really big one is just lighting, just making sure that it's not too dark because a designer, we can only do so much Photoshop, but um, it's easier if it has, nice lighting, then there's a lot to work with.
Yeah. Um, any other tips and tricks for like that phone photography?
Yeah, I mean, those are the main ones. I think just getting a wide array too of shots, like the more the merrier when it comes to that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. And I know like in a previous life when I worked in house, I worked remotely. So that might be something that other people are up against is like you don't work in the office where the equipment is. And it can be really hard to get pictures or videos in those circumstances. I think two things that helped me are one, like take advantage of the times when you are around the equipment. Like if you're ever doing a visit or you're at a show, like obviously the show floor isn't the same as the shop floor, but you can still get some good like demo videos of like equipment running or pictures of, that equipment that's, clean and nice looking if you want that. The other thing is encouraging the members of your team who are on the floor and are around the equipment and giving them the tips to take good photos as well. I know Luke Wittenbreaker from MacTech talked about how he actually has a program with his technicians where they submit photos and they can get I think it might be like gift cards or something, but he mentioned that in his episode. I think it was 2 episodes ago. He was talking about that. So that's another great tip to get good photos if you're kind of lacking there.
Yeah, that's super cool. That's a good incentive.
Um, so to kind of talked about images, that is sometimes a limiting factor for industrial ad creative, but there are other ways that you can convey ideas and concepts in ad creative. So TJ, do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so some of the other things that we do at Gorilla are infographics, text ads, and illustrations. Excuse me. So I think that when you're exploring these more conceptual ads, it's still really important that you have a really clear and strong foundational idea and messaging. Even the coolest, most out there creative still has a strong foundation. And so, that could be a really cool, illustration. I think from my experience, like we had a client this year who we couldn't get any stock, like we were using stock photos because we couldn't get any assets because everything was supposed to be in a clean room. And so we came up with a suite of like cool illustrations that were like lab equipment and bottles and things like that. That it was more conceptual, but it was still really tied, like the copy and the headlines were still really tied to the foundation of like, just really solid idea and what we were trying to get across. So there's things like that, or yeah, just interesting text ads that catch people's attention and make them follow sort of the trail of hierarchy to get to the end result of what we're trying to get them to focus on. Yeah, there's a lot of different things you can do.
Yeah. Do you have any examples of like kind of what a conceptual ad might look like that's not using product images? I know we've run some ourselves for Gorilla. If you wanted to maybe talk about those.
Yeah, so this last round that we did at Gorilla, the concept was like, this is how advanced your like company is, this is how advanced your manufacturing is, but this is how behind your marketing is. And so we did like an old factory floor of car manufacturers from like the 60s or 70s, and then we did like a really modern day one too. um so yeah, I mean, there was no, we don't have a physical product that we're selling, so it was very conceptual, but it was still tied to like a really strong idea of your marketing needs to catch up with how good your company actually is.
Mm. Yeah, I think the key there is like if you're going to do a conceptual ad, you need a strong concept, like a strong idea that you're trying to convey, that's going to click for people when they see it. Because obviously, if you have a photo of your product and that's recognizable to people, that's kind of an automatic click. But if you're trying to get kind of more creative there, the concept and the idea behind it has to be really good.
Yeah, I don't think there's any amount of creativity that is gonna make up for having a bad idea, basically, or concept.
Mhm. And sometimes you don't know that. You just have to put it out and kind of test and see what kind of results you get back. Like it's not the end of the world if an ad isn't perfect or isn't great. Like we all have ads that are kind of a dud. But that's how you learn and continue iterating and making better concepts going forward.
Yeah, and it's also a great platform to try new things because we can turn them off. It's not a forever thing.
Yeah, or even like it's not a print ad where it's like it's running for like you can't turn off a print ad, right? Or any sort of other like physical advertising like that, but digital is super agile in that way.
Yeah.
TJ, somebody asked in the chat if you could show that gorilla ad you were talking about on screen. I don't know if you have it handy or we can pull it up later in the show too. Um,
Yeah, I can pull it up. I have
yeah,
it here somewhere. Give me 1 second.
cool. And maybe while you're looking for that, the next thing I wanted to ask was about because you had mentioned illustrations or kind of more conceptual ads beyond just like a photo and some text. If you're not a designer, that can feel kind of daunting. What are some of the tools that you would recommend for beginners, kind of the good, better, best for bringing ad creative to life?
Yeah, totally. So Canva is good for, people who are just starting out, or, maybe don't have the energy or the time to put into, a lot of focus in their design. You can do a good amount with Canva. There's a lot of templates. Um, and it's pretty easy. The learning curve is pretty small, but I think the downside there is it is all pre-made templates. So you're going to run into seeing if a lot of people are using Canva, it's going to look the same basically across a lot of different platforms. Even if you're like swapping in your brand colors and your own assets, it's all going to look pretty similar. Um, and then you have Adobe Express is really good. It's like a turbocharged Canva. So there's a lot more features. It's a little bit harder to learn, and they have a lot of new AI features that they're always coming up with that are pretty cool if that's something that you're interested in. And again, there's templates, but they're a little bit more customizable. And then the best thing to do is just hire a designer, really.
Yeah, that's awesome. Did you find that ad?
I did, yeah. So let me
Okay.
share. So can everyone see that?
Yeah,
I like that one.
Yeah, we had really, really good results with this also. So
that's awesome. Um, and I know like Gareth just dropped one in the chat too. That was a pretty cool example of I think something pretty unique. If he wants to come on and share that, I'd welcome that, but not sure if he's able to. Cool. That's okay. Definitely check it out in the chat though. It's a really cool concept of like taking that clean image and putting it in a different environment. That was really unique. So pretty neat there. Um, so TJ, you said Canva's good for beginner. It's a good starting point. Adobe Express is maybe good intermediate, and then the best is really, having an experienced designer if you're going to be doing a lot of design work. What are some of your tips for finding a good design partner to work with?
Yeah, good question. Good designers are everywhere right now. It's definitely not hard to find a good designer if you're looking. LinkedIn obviously is the best. If you go and post right now that you're looking for a designer, you will have hundreds of comments or people DMing you. I see it every day on LinkedIn. There are a lot of designers out there. Some things that I would look for is, having a online portfolio is like a hotly debated topic in the design world all the time. Like, should people do it? Some designers don't have time to do it, or a lot of their stuff is NDA, but you need to be able to look at some sort of work. So, that's important. I think in like a body of work, whatever that may be, like looking for consistency, the ability to problem solve creatively, and project diversity is really important. Looking at someone's work and seeing them be able to execute different projects across different, whether that's logo design or visual design or one sheets or things like that, but all at a high level and be really consistent is super important. Um, and I think that like something that is happening a lot right now is, people want designers to be able to do 30 different things. And if you want a designer, you should hire a designer. There are a lot of designers out there that have other skills, but I think that should be looked at more as a plus. Like that's an extra addition, but not a requirement. You don't need your designer to be a video editor or a motion designer. So all those things are just pluses.
Gotcha. And Carla asked about in the chat, like Fiverr or Upwork, some of those sites for finding freelancers. What has been your experience or I guess thoughts on platforms like that?
Yeah, it's hit or miss, right? I think that I know some designers that's pretty much all they do is they just do work on Fiverr. I would say that it's not as consistent. It's harder to find people that are doing good work consistently for the right price. A lot of what happens there is people go there looking for the cheapest possible option, and then that's what they find, and then they have to pay more after the fact to have someone come in and fix it.
Yeah, it sounds like others have had similar experiences based on the chat. It can be pretty hit or miss, and probably recommend, like you suggested, if you post on LinkedIn, people will find you and you can find good referrals for folks that have worked with others kind of in your network. So that's good. Um, what about like collaboration with a designer, whether they're like an in-house designer that you've hired full time or like a freelancer you're working with? How do you need to like work together with a designer to get like the right concepts to light?
Yeah, I mean, I think it all starts with the right brief for the project, the outline, what you're handing them. The more specific brief that you can give them, or project guidelines that you can give them, is going to be important. And then it's really the designer's job to work and find the creativity within that. But I think it's really important to have strong guidelines. As far as like brainstorming things like that, like I always work backwards. So it's like, this is the brief I've been given. This is the problem that we need to solve. How do we get there? This is the end goal. How do we get there? And the most straightforward way. And then if we can add, does the brief call for creativity, or sort of like, what can I do to make it a little bit more interesting? But I think the biggest thing is just, yeah, being open to the designer's experience, like what they're bringing to the table, and just give them a good brief, give them good outlines.
Yeah, absolutely. And like that kind of goes, I was going to say it goes both ways, but like when it comes to feedback and working with a designer to kind of revise things, how do you balance like giving helpful feedback and also like trusting the expertise of your designer you're working with?
Yeah, I mean, it's always hard. From the design perspective, it's like I'm bringing a lot of experience, and so I think that I need to be able to justify my reasoning. And so if the designer can't really justify their reasoning other than like I did it because, like, that's not always great. I think I really enjoy feedback that is really concise and straight to the point, and reasoning behind it. I value feedback less when it's just like I think this, or like it makes me, you know what I mean? I think you need to have a good reasoning behind it for it to be valuable feedback. Um, and then yeah, I mean it's always a dance. But I think if you found a good designer and you've put them in the right position, um, it's going to be a lot easier. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's always finding a balance between the stakeholders and the designer's experience and their reasoning.
Hmm. One thing that we do when we're like reviewing ad creative internally that has been helpful is doing like live review sessions because you can waste a lot of time and delay a lot of progress with like complicated email threads back and forth about like the certain shade of blue you're using in like an ad. And that's just like ultimately not as productive as just launching the ad with maybe the imperfect shade of blue, but you're still going to get it in front of an audience and get results one way or another. Either it works or it doesn't. And so I think just learning to be okay with a little bit of imperfection and looking for like what is most important. Like if we're have a picture of like the wrong piece of equipment, like yeah, let's change that. But if it's something that feels like, gosh, like I feel like I'm being too nitpicky here, challenge yourself. Like see what happens when it just runs. I've had several examples where it's like, uh, I didn't love it personally, or I, could have picked at it a little bit more, but it ran and it did just fine or it did great. So I think that's always a good thing to challenge yourself on when you're the one that's giving feedback to a designer.
Yeah, totally. And I think, like you said, like doing live edits has been sort of a game changer. Like having everybody in the room, not having to worry about, a day or two of waiting through an email or Slack thread, where someone's like, "Hey, I don't like this," like you said, color. I can change it right there, and we can all look at it and say, "Oh, this makes sense," or "No, it doesn't make sense." Or I can, make text bigger live, and we can all look at it and say, "This makes sense," or "It doesn't make sense."
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely been a big game changer to just have some synchronous work there. Um, awesome. Well, let's talk a little bit about design pitfalls while we're kind of on the topic of feedback here. What are some common like mistakes that, industrial design might make in terms of ad creative?
Yeah, I think the big one is just not prioritizing design or good design. I think that there is still a lot of the same things going on. And I think that rather than, historically looking at it and being like, oh, well, my peers are doing this and my competition's doing this. So it's probably fine if like I sort of do this also. Like you want to find the balance of design that is makes sense for the industry, but it doesn't look like everything else. But you don't want it to be so different that it's off-putting and doesn't make sense. So definitely like prioritizing good design and finding the balance of creativity. I think we already talked about it a lot, but like using a lot of pre-made templates. Um, I think having your designer make your own custom templates is great. That streamlines everything, super helpful. But just, going online and finding the same templates that everyone else is using, it's really boring and you can tell right away. Um, I feel like I see it all the time. I see 3 or 4 every day of different companies using the same templates. Um, yeah, and I think just like bad design causes problems and confusion, and good design solves those problems. So that's really important. Clarity is the most important thing at the end of the day. And then just sort of like your basic, like I said, if you have a good designer, they should be thinking about these things, but just your basic understanding of design theory, color theory, layout, and hierarchy, and just making things really legible.
Yeah, for sure. And I know we've talked about some of those like design basics, some of those terms you just threw out there about hierarchy and color and everything like that. We've talked about some of those in a couple of previous episodes with our other designer, Jenny. That's kind of a great place to start if you want to visit some design basics. Um, so I guess, TJ, what resources would you recommend for anyone that's maybe trying to get better at design or just wants to be kind of a more informed marketer giving feedback to a designer?
Yeah, totally. I mean, LinkedIn is great. Follow designers, like find people that are designing in the industry and see what they're doing, and how you can catch up or stand out. I think that's like really the big one. Um, there are tons of resources online. Like YouTube is great, Instagram is great. Luckily right now there's tons of people in every design space making content online, industrial or really anything. Um, so I mean that's what I would say. I would say just consume good design, not even necessarily just in industrial design. Like I'm fairly new um, to the field, but I think just like my background and like consuming the designers and the art that I really like has informed how I go about creating ads in our space.
Hmm. And we just got a question in the chat from Jake. Do you have any designers that you recommend following on LinkedIn?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if he's on LinkedIn, but Aaron Draplin is a great designer. He is from Portland, Oregon. He comes from like a like snowboarding sort of like punk music background, but he's kind of become like an icon in the design world. And a lot of his designs are very inspired by like 70s vintage and industrial work. So
Awesome.
he's great. I met him. I lived in Portland for a while, and yeah, he's just a great guy.
Yeah. And you mentioned like it's come up in the chat a little bit, like the importance of having someone that understands industrial. And obviously you have background like outside of industrial too. How do you think like design trends in other industries can inform I don't know, some more creative designs maybe in industrial?
Yeah, yeah. So I don't come from an industrial background, but I do like my family are farmers in Washington. So I grew up around big industrial buildings and equipment. And I think that like um, there's a lot of really, really good design, like older sort of industrial logos and things like that were really inspiring to me. But yeah, I mean, I think that just it's always a hard balance of like keeping up with trends and you don't want to follow trends, but I just think that the idea of like Liquid Death is like a great example, and I think every like marketing department in the world has talked about them at one point. But just like how out of the box and different they are, and like I think the idea of just not being afraid to be creative and try new things is really important, and I think that's what you're going to get by I like if I had to condense like what you would get from following other designers and other fields and creative work in other fields is just like don't be afraid to go out of the box a little bit.
Yeah. And there's kind of small ways that you can do that. Like I've had some clients in the industrial space that something they're looking for in their design in ads and also in their website is like we want to look like more high tech
Mhm.
or we want to like we know we have great engineering expertise and we can serve really large customers, but we're still a pretty small company. Like we want our design to help us come off as like larger than we are, right? Because sometimes like a big company might not want to work with like a super small company. I don't know. Those are kind of examples of how design can like have a big impact on how you're perceived by your customers and how you might look for inspiration from not your peers who are the same size and have the similar design to you, but like the companies that you kind of want to emulate and kind of come off as to your customers.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that's a great example. It's like, a website refresh can make a 60-year-old company look brand new, but they're still bringing 60 years of experience to their customers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and kind of in line with that, we got a question from Dale. I don't know if you want to come on and add some more color to that, Dale, about color palettes that you were curious about.
Sure. A lot of times when we're looking at maybe a new website design or something, you're always looking at color palettes. What's appealing to certain people in certain industries, and like the food industry, they tend to go with oranges and yellows and things that are appealing to make you hungry and that kind of thing. But just wonder about industrial, if if there's any thoughts on what you tend to move toward that appeal to more of that. Of course, I like Gorilla's dark orange, but just curious about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we see a lot of like a lot of blacks and grays and things that invoke like metal or machinery, like a lot of earthier tones, which are great. I mean, I think thinking about color palette is interesting because like you could pick something that really resonates with your general audience and feels at home, or you can, go a little bit brighter and pick, like a brighter orange or something that, still fits, but maybe stands out and catches their eye. Yeah, I think with industrial, it's a lot of earth tones and things like that. A lot of more colors that are grounded.
Mm-hmm. I also noticed like a lot of like primary colors like reds and blues and like Randall is also another member of he's our digital creative director that's also on the call. Didn't mean to put him on the spot, but that is like some feedback that I've heard you give too, is sometimes with industrial there's a tendency to have a lot of contrast, like it's like black and red, which is very harsh, but something you can do to like modernize or maybe like change up your design a little bit is kind of adding some more like intermediary colors in there too.
Yeah, for sure. I'll jump in and say that like a lot of brands will start with like we need 3 brand colors and that's it. I think it's okay to like define a brand color, and those are like the colors that are your brand, and you should use those sparingly, because if you use them all over the place, they lose their impact. So like in addition to those brand colors, like the ones that you're gonna put in your logo and put on your buttons on your website, you should have like some gradients and some lighter shades and different tints of those colors that you use a lot more of. And when you kind of like tone those down, it allows your main brand color to really like pop off the page and have a ton of impact. But if you use that same color all over the place, you end up with a really like contrasty and kind of like just attacking you kind of thing. And it loses its impact, your brand color. So like lean into using other complementary colors that are kind of toned down in saturation and things, and then that allows your main color to really stick out.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Got a surprise bonus cameo from Randall. Love it. Awesome. Well, TJ, are there any other parting thoughts or advice for industrial companies that are, looking to elevate their design game a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, just prioritize design. Find a good designer that you trust and you like their work, and put the right people in the right spots and let them help you. Don't be afraid to push the boundaries a little bit.
Yeah. And we actually did just get one more question in the chat from Karen. And I don't know if you want to come on and add some more context, but I'll just ask it here since we're kind of wrapping up. Karen wanted to ask about reversing text out in white on a color background and kind of what not to do there.
Yeah, like doing just the text outline. I think that's the question, and if we should be doing that. I tend to stay away from just using the outline of a text. I think that in my experience, it's not what the text is meant to look like, just using the outline. You can do it here and there, but I would suggest always, doing a full text. And Randall could probably speak to that too, but that's just, that's my thoughts on it. I think it gets weird with contrast, and it's much easier to make solid text look good than it is to outline text. And there's other ways to highlight words or make things stand out that I think would work better.
Yeah, and if you're in doubt, I think there are some good like contrast checkers online, things that can help you test for like legibility in creative as well. Awesome. Well, we'll just leave with a couple of announcements and wrap up here. Invitation to join us in the Industrial Marketing Collective. That's run on the platform circle.so. As we announced a couple of shows back, we will be sunsetting Slack, our Slack channel, at the end of this year. So make sure to join us in the Industrial Marketing Collective on circle.so to keep the conversation going. And if you need help getting in there, just message any of us, let us know. We also have Industrial Marketing Summits happening in 2025. Registration is open. That'll be in Austin, Texas again this year, February 26th through 28th. So definitely check that out and get your tickets now. And next time on IMC Live, we will be joined on November 7th by our guest Rich Ward to talk about how to build your SMEs into thought leaders on LinkedIn, get them to kind of post more and gain a following. So that'll be a good topic next time. But that's all we've got for you today, folks. Thanks so much for joining us.